As India has created history by vaccinating 100 crore people against COVID-19, All India Radio salutes all the doctors, nurses, other frontline workers and all those who got vaccinated and made this possible. Even though the country has achieved this feat, we caution our listeners that the battle against COVID is not over yet. We appeal to our listeners to get fully vaccinated at the earliest and also help others get vaccinated. During the festival season, please follow these 3 simple steps. Wear a face mask, maintain 2 gaz ki duri for social distancing, and focus on hand and face hygiene. For any COVID-related information and guidance, contact the national helpline numbers 011-2397-8046 and 1075. And now the news in detail. The 26th edition of the Conference of Parties COP26 began on Sunday. The summit, which was originally slated to be held in 2020 but was deferred to 2021 in view of the COVID-19 pandemic. The Conference of the Parties is an annual summit under the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change, UNFCCC. Ahead of the event, the UNFCCC released a video previewing COP26 in the voice of the celebrated broadcaster, Sir David Attenborough.
It is crucial that these meetings in Glasgow, COP26, have success and that at last the nations will come together to solve the crippling problems that the world, the globe, now faces.
Declaring the COP26 open, the outgoing president of the COP, Chile's Carolina Smidge, paid homage to the lives lost in the COVID pandemic.
Distinguished delegates, ladies and gentlemen, it gives me great pleasure to declare open the 26th session of the Conference of the Parties to the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change.
The UK holds the presidency of the COP26. The president of COP26, Mr. Alok Sharma, in his opening speech referred to the latest IPCC report on climate change as a wake-up call for humanity. He said that the COP26 is the platform to act on the commitments made in Paris 6 years ago.
Friends, in each of our countries, we are seeing the devastating impact of a changing climate. Floods, cyclones, wildfires, record temperatures. And we know that our shared planet is changing for the worse. And we can only address that together through this international system. And we know what we need to do. Because 6 years ago in Paris, we agreed our shared goals. We said we would protect people and nature from the effects of climate change. We said we would get finance flowing to climate action. And we said we would limit the rise in global temperature to well below 2 degrees, pursuing efforts towards 1.5.
President of the 76th UN General Assembly, Mr. Abdullah Shahid, addressed the opening of COP26. Mr. Shahid stressed that the world has run out of excuses for climate action, and now is the time for a course correction.
With the news that climate finance will not reach the promised goal of 100 billion annually until 2023, we must accelerate our efforts to ensure that all countries have access to the latest technological innovations. Nearly $100 trillion have been pledged to net zero targets by the private sector. Yet, it is unclear how they will be utilized, prioritized, or measured. It is imperative that their contributions are as efficient and impactful as possible.
In his address, Mr. Shahid also alluded to Frankie the dinosaur, the character depicted in the UNDP video released ahead of the COP26. In the video, actor Jack Black as Frankie the dinosaur makes a strong case for humans to change their ways or go extinct.
You're headed for a climate disaster, and yet every year governments spend hundreds of billions of public funds on fossil fuel subsidies. Imagine if we had spent hundreds of billions per year subsidizing giant meteors. That's what you're doing right now. So here's my wild idea. Don't choose extinction. Save your species before it's too late. It's time for you humans to stop making excuses and start making changes. Thank you.
The G20 summit in Rome concluded with the leaders adopting the Rome Declaration. Briefing the media in Rome, Union Minister and India's G20 Sherpa Piyush Goyal said G20 Rome has delivered a strong message of recovery from the pandemic in terms of economy, health, employment, education, tourism and most importantly, climate action. He said the agenda of the developing countries in which India has been taking a leadership role has been brought into the text of the Rome Declaration. Prime Minister Narendra Modi will emplane for Glasgow in a short while from now to participate in the COP26. Speaking ahead of the occasion, India's Commerce Minister and Sherpa at the G20, Mr. Piyush Goyal, said that Prime Minister Modi will be a voice for the developing world at the COP26.
Prime Minister Shri Narendra Modi will be embarking for Glasgow later in the evening today and attending the COP26 summit in the United Kingdom, again representing the voice of the developing world, the voice of the more vulnerable sections of society and protecting the interests both of humanity with very ambitious activity going on in India to contribute to climate change, to contribute in our own big way to support the effort to leave behind a better planet for the next generation.
Speaking on the outcomes of the G20 summit and India's agenda, Mr. Goyal said there has been an endorsement of a framework for the mutual recognition of COVID-19 vaccines. He added that the G20 leaders have agreed to optimize the process of vaccine approval by the World Health Organization.
In the run-up to the UN Climate Summit or the Conference of Parties COP26, All India Radio brings to you a ready reckoner to explain the jargon associated with the summit. Under the COP26 Explainer series, every day we bring to you the terms and concepts that will be in use over the coming fortnight. Today we shall talk about Nationally Determined Contributions or NDCs.
Nationally Determined Contributions or NDCs are self-defined emission reduction targets by countries under the Paris Agreement. The Paris Agreement, signed in 2015, requires each party to prepare and maintain NDCs to limit global warming. Currently, India has committed to reduce the emissions intensity of its economy by 33 to 35% compared to 2005 levels. Emission intensity is the amount of greenhouse gases released per unit GDP. India also committed to increase the share of non-fossil fuel sources to 40% of the power generation capacity by 2030. The third key component is the creation of an additional carbon sink of 2.5 to 3 billion tons of carbon dioxide equivalent. Carbon sinks are ways to remove greenhouse gases from the atmosphere. At the Climate Ambition Summit held in 2020, Prime Minister Narendra Modi asserted that India is not only on track to achieve its Paris Agreement targets, but will exceed them beyond expectations. Reshma Tiwari for World News.
Ahead of the COP26 summit in Glasgow, an enormous body of ice in Antarctica has been formally named the Glasgow Glacier by researchers at the University of Leeds to mark the COP26 summit. The UK government in a statement said that a chain of fast-flowing Antarctic glaciers were named for important climate meetings including Glasgow, Geneva, Paris and Berlin. British Prime Minister Boris Johnson in a statement said that the naming of the glacier as Glasgow Glacier will be a stark reminder of what we are working to preserve. Dramatic changes in ice cover and images of Antarctica have become synonymous with climate change.
Prime Minister Narendra Modi on Sunday met his Spanish counterpart Pedro Sanchez on the sidelines of the G20 summit at Rome in Italy. The two leaders held discussion to strengthen bilateral relations. Both leaders had fruitful talks on ways to deepen ties between India and Spain. The two nations are cooperating extensively in areas such as trade, energy, innovation and more. Mr. Modi invited Spain to invest in various sectors in India, including green hydrogen, infrastructure and defence manufacturing. Mr. Modi also met German Chancellor Angela Merkel on Sunday. Both sides extensively discussed bilateral relations and reaffirmed the commitment to maintain the close strategic partnership. He also met the President of Indonesia, Joko Widodo, on the sidelines of the summit. PM Modi will also attend an event hosted by US President Joe Biden on supply chain resilience. Our correspondent Divakar has a report from Rome.
Along with other world leaders attending G20 summit, Prime Minister Narendra Modi today visited world-famous Trevi Fountain in Rome. It is one of the most beautiful fountains in the world and is famous for the tradition of coin toss. It is believed that if one throws a coin over the shoulder into the water of fountain, they will return to Rome. The world leaders also threw a coin for people, planet and prosperity in the wishing well of the fountain. Following the G20 summit, Mr. Modi will leave for Glasgow to attend the COP26 summit. Divakar, AR News, Rome.
G20 leaders on Sunday have endorsed a global minimum tax of 15% on big multinational businesses. US President Joe Biden in a tweet said that the G20 leaders representing 80% of the world's GDP made clear their support for a strong global minimum tax. In June this year, the tax deal was adopted in the OECD and the G20 Inclusive Framework on Base Erosion and Profit Shifting BEPS. A report.
BEPS refers to tax-avoiding strategies used by big multinational companies that exploit the gaps and mismatches in tax rules across the globe. Earlier this year, around 130 countries representing more than 90% of the global GDP adopted the global corporate tax rate of at least 15%. British Finance Minister Mr. Rishi Sunak, after the G7 summit in June, hailed the development as historic.
G7 finance ministers have reached a historic agreement to reform the global tax system, to make it fit for the global digital age, but crucially to make sure that it's fair.
The countries agreed upon a two-pillar solution to address the tax challenges arising from the digitalization of the economy. The first pillar seeks to address the problem of establishing a nexus between multinational companies and the market jurisdiction. This is a challenge because of the borderless nature of the digital economy. Pillar 2 seeks to introduce a global minimum corporate tax rate that countries can use to protect their tax bases. A minimum rate of at least 15% was agreed upon in the negotiations. In a statement, the OECD said that it is estimated to generate around $150 billion in additional global tax revenues annually. In July, India joined the Global Corporate Tax Framework. India's Finance Ministry in a statement said that the principles underlying the solution vindicate India's stand for a greater share of profits for the markets. Reshma Tiwari for World News.
Japan went to polls in the general elections on Sunday. The vote is widely seen as a test for Japan's new Prime Minister Fumio Kishida. Last month, Mr. Kishida became leader of the Liberal Democratic Party after Mr. Yoshihide Suga resigned. According to reports, Mr. Suga's resignation was partly due to public discontent over his response to the COVID-19 crisis. According to reports, Mr. Kishida has pledged to issue a fresh stimulus package worth tens of trillions of yen to counter the impact of the pandemic. U.S. Secretary of State Antony Blinken met External Affairs Minister of India Dr. S. Jaishankar on the margins of the G20 summit in Rome. Both leaders discussed efforts to deepen the U.S.-India comprehensive global strategic partnership. Secretary Blinken and Minister Jaishankar discussed a range of issues, including efforts to strengthen Indo-Pacific cooperation. Meanwhile, Mr. Blinken also met with State Councillor and Foreign Minister Wang Yi on Saturday in Rome. In a statement, the U.S. State Department said that Secretary Blinken raised concerns about a range of China's actions that undermine the international rules-based order. He also underscored the importance of maintaining open lines of communication.
The U.S. health regulator, the Food and Drug Administration, FDA, on Friday authorized the Pfizer, Inc. and BioNTech coronavirus vaccine for children aged 5 to 11 years. This made it the first COVID-19 shot for young children in the United States. Only a few other countries, including China, Cuba and the United Arab Emirates, have so far cleared COVID-19 vaccines for children in this age group and younger. According to reports, advisors and the FDA panel said a lower dose could help mitigate some of the rare side effects. Pfizer and BioNTech said that their vaccine showed 90.7% efficacy against the coronavirus in a clinical trial of children aged 5 to 11. This is All India Radio giving you the news. For quick news updates round the clock, follow us on Twitter at AIR News Alerts.
In today's Hotspot section, we bring you a discussion on the G20 summit and beyond. In conversation are Anil Kumar Trigunayat, former diplomat, and Nilova Roy Chaudhary, journalist.
We are joined today by Ambassador Anil Trigunayak, who is going to be explaining to us some of the intricacies of what exactly the G20 does and how it can carry the global agenda forward positively. Please tell me how significant is this meeting of the leaders of the G20 countries, first of all?
Thank you for having me. In fact, as you know, the G20, and as you mentioned rightly, that it is representative of the largest economy, both from most highly developed economies to the developing economies, and covers a major part of the world's economic activity. And therefore, in the backdrop of the pandemic that has really crippled the global economy, it is a highly significant first in-person meeting, mostly. Of course, some leaders, so we can call it as a hybrid meeting. Some leaders like that of China and Russia are participating online. So what I see is that the motto of this, vision of this meeting by Italian Prime Minister was basically focusing on three key issues, that is people, because of the pandemic that is happening, or their overall health and environment and the planet, as well as to prosperity, that is means how the economic recovery will take place. So whether the economic recovery can take place or can transform in a green manner is another very important focus of this event. And as you know, immediately after this, tomorrow and day after, we have the discussions in Glasgow on COP26. So these are all being blended together. In my view, it is probably a very good opportunity for the world to, and especially these G20 countries, to have a look at in totality of the problems, the challenges, and the solutions that are going to come.
I found rather interesting about this particular G20 summit is the fact that China is President of China is not present in this. So does that detract from the summit in any way in terms of the effects? You're talking about, our Prime Minister is talking about the collaborative effects of the need to work together to get the world off the ground again, and running, as it were.
Yeah, I mean, you're right. I mean, in fact, the Chinese president has not traveled for the last 21 months. That is true. And he is not attending this meeting. And in my view, I mean, this may be wrong, absolutely. Maybe not because of the pandemic per se, but I think it could be because of the geopolitical landscape that with the UK, it has developed. There is a problem between UK and China. As you know, the AUKUS has been formed recently within the context. So it is possible that he may not have decided not to personally go there. But at the same time, China is one of the most important elements for a country in this regard, especially whether it is a fight against the climate or the change or fight against the pandemic.
One of the most important issues that seems to, consensus items that seems to have emerged from this particular summit is the fact that there is a deal on the imposition of a minimum 15% tax on big business. I mean, the Prime Minister Modi ji also said that he supported this measure because he was among those who articulated this measure first in 2014. Now, an issue as important as this, with the absence of leaders like, the physical absence of leaders like the Chinese president and the Russian president, is this likely to have an impact on the overall liquidity that the world faces in a time of trying to come out of this crisis?
I think the China on that would be on board. In my view, the China or Russia, they are not backing out of this kind of situation because that also helps them. Liquidity, every country wants it, right? But the Chinese multinational corporations have been facing a pushback in the Western countries. Whether you talk about Huawei, which is one of the biggest, or ZTE or Alibaba or some other. So they are also having a problem in different countries. So I think that what they would want in return for any concessions that they want to give in implementation stage is that their companies also get the equal benefits. So that is that. They have the multinational corporations, their own. So I think that is where there might be a little glitch. But otherwise, I think on the principle of the liquidity would be available to everyone in terms of these kind of taxes, and there would be less tax evasion by these companies parking it in those havens.
In fact, US President Joe Biden yesterday tweeted that this is more than just a tax deal. It is diplomacy reshaping our global economy and delivering for the people of the world. And, almost 140 nations are likely to be linked by this particular fairly seminal sounding deal. Whether it works or not is anybody's guess. But as you have been pointing out, it is vital that there has to be now a joint collaborative approach in all seriousness, because as you rightly pointed out, the climate change issue has not been really dealt with adequately, and the world is witnessing the craziest kinds of climate disasters because people have not committed, have not adhered to their commitments. So can this particular, sort of tax and an insistence on some kind of compliance be the way forward?
Yes, it will definitely be quite useful, for some kind of global, I would say, standard, which is very important. I mean, this is something, if it happens, if it is implemented genuinely and realistically, then I think that it can be beneficial. And then, what will happen is that if there is some kind of an equanimous approach everywhere, then the problem of uncertainty in the functioning of the global financial system can be reduced to some extent. That is quite possible. So I think that this is a good thing that we have been pitching for it for a long time. Another good thing that has happened is that today they have also agreed in the G20 that the maximum temperature would be 1.5 degrees instead of 2 degrees now. So which is a good thing, but again, we have to see how much it is implemented, which country takes on and which does not. So that is something that needs to be watched in future.
Now, most of the leaders who have come for this particular summit will be moving on, as you rightly said, tomorrow to Glasgow for the climate change summit. Now, I suppose most of them will be looking at this tax to somehow enable some kind of positive forward movement on climate goals and actually putting some money where their statements are. Will this detract from efforts, for example, to mitigate the trauma of the post-pandemic recovery just on the health sector?
Now, I think that, of course, the COP26 will not be directly dealing with the health pandemic as it is, because its main mandate is mainly regarding the environmental damage that is happening or climate change that is happening. But overall, the resources are limited globally, as we know. And so is the intent. I mean, that is also very important. So it is there I think that while the pandemic remains both in the national domain and the international domain is a major challenge, and the fact that it should not recur again. So that is what the idea is, that while we are going to address it now by jointly working on it, whether through COVAX facility, Gavi or some others, but how we are going to move forward so that the economic recovery also takes place, because that has been impacted by the pandemic. But climate change have its own requirements of funding, which is about $100 billion was agreed about a decade or so ago. Nothing came out of it. Now they are talking about even saying that from this tax it is possible to fund it or something. So both will demand these resources from this. And but there are key issues that will be discussed there. As I said, that already they have agreed to 1.5 degree maximum warming now. They have agreed to a net zero by 2050. Some countries are going to do by 2060. India is one country which has already committed to and has done more than what it had agreed to do as per the Paris Summit. So that is there. But India's, I think that we are looking at is that something equitable, basically. I mean, whether it is in the domain of distribution of the carbon space, or whether it is for mitigation, adaptation, as you mentioned, or for that matter, creating resilient building measures, as they call it, something, and providing finance, technology. So this is very important. But one important point that Prime Minister will make or has been making is that India's lifestyle is such, which is sustaining. The way we live, the way we interact with the nature, because we are not the high emitters. That is the thing, per capita. So I think that is where India has much to offer.
That sounds absolutely right. For a change, it is ending on a somewhat hopeful note, when maybe something will be tangible on the ground as opposed to only a lot of great intentions. Keen out of time, Anil. Thank you.
moving on to sports. In the ICC Men's T20 World Cup, New Zealand beat India by 8 wickets at the Dubai International Cricket Stadium in Dubai. Chasing the target of 111 set by India, New Zealand made 111 for the loss of 2 wickets. For New Zealand, Daryl Mitchell was the top scorer with 49, while skipper Kane Williamson was unbeaten on 33. Ish Sodhi was declared the player of the match for taking 2 wickets for 17 runs in 4 overs. Earlier, New Zealand won the toss and elected to field. In another match, Afghanistan defeated Namibia by 62 runs in Abu Dhabi this evening. Electing to bat, Afghanistan scored 160 runs for the loss of 5 wickets in the stipulated 20 overs. Chasing the target, Namibia scored only 98 runs for the loss of 9 wickets in 20 overs. On Monday, England will take on Sri Lanka in Sharjah at 7:30 p.m. All India Radio is broadcasting ball-by-ball commentary of the World Cup matches.
Now let us take a look at the major developments around the world as reported in the foreign press. The Global Mail reports Australia set to partially reopen international border for vaccinated public. The Washington Post writes Biden meets world leaders, Prince Charles pleads for climate action. Financial Times reports U.S. companies struggle with staff shortages despite raising wages. And the Wall Street Journal says Sudanese security forces fire bullets at anti-coup protesters.
Now a quick look at the headlines once again. Climate Change Summit COP26 gets underway in Glasgow, Scotland. India shall be a voice for the developing world and the vulnerable sections of society at COP26, says India's G20 Sherpa Piyush Goyal. Prime Minister Narendra Modi meets world leaders as G20 summit concludes with the adoption of the Rome Declaration. G20 leaders agree upon global minimum tax of 15% on big multinational businesses. Japan heads to polls in the general elections in the first test for Prime Minister Fumio Kishida. U.S. Secretary of State Antony Blinken meets External Affairs Minister Dr. S. Jaishankar in Rome, discuss deepening of U.S.-India Comprehensive Global Strategic Partnership. U.S. drug regulator approves Pfizer BioNTech COVID vaccine for use in children between 5 and 11 years. And in the T20 World Cup, New Zealand beat India by 8 wickets in Dubai. India is celebrating the 152nd birth anniversary of Mahatma Gandhi. Before we end, let us listen to his favourite bhajan, Vaishnav Jan, by artists from Zambia. And with that, we end this bulletin. We'll be back at the same time tomorrow with the next edition of World News.